Rain poured down from the dark sky, turning the road into a shiny black ribbon under the dim streetlights. Alina's old car rattled as she drove slowly, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. In the back seat, her 2 young daughters were fast asleep, their heads leaning against each other. Wrapped in a thin blanket that was barely enough to keep them warm, the heater in the car was broken, and the sound of the rain tapping against the roof filled the silence. She was tired, her body aching after working a long shift, but she kept driving, the thought of finally reaching home the only thing keeping her awake. The road ahead was almost empty. Not a single car had passed for the last 20 minutes. It was one of those nights when the world felt quiet, almost too quiet. Alina's eyes scanned the wet road when something caught her attention in the distance. 2 small, weak flashes of orange light blinked through the curtain of rain. At first, she thought it might be a streetlight about to go out. But as she got closer, she realized they were hazard lights. The kind that flicker on a car when there's trouble. Her heart gave a small jump. She slowed down and pulled her car to the side. Her daughter stirred a little, but didn't wake. She peered through the windshield and saw a black luxury car parked at an odd angle on the side of the road. The driver's side door was closed, but the headlights were still on. The rain made it hard to see clearly, but she could just make out a shadow slumped forward over the steering wheel. Alina's first thought was to drive on. She had her daughters to think about, and it was late. But something inside her wouldn't let her. She couldn't just leave. A person there, not in this weather, not when they might be hurt. She looked back at her sleeping girls and whispered to them softly, telling them to stay inside no matter what. She switched off the engine, grabbed her scarf, and stepped out into the cold night. The rain instantly soaked through her thin coat, chilling her to the bone. She hurried toward the black car, her shoes splashing through puddles when she reached the driver's side. She could see him more clearly now, a man in his late 30s or early 40s, dressed in a tailored suit that was now wet and crumpled. His head rested against the steering wheel. A thin line of blood ran down from his temple, mixing with the rainwater on his face. "Sir, can you hear me?" Alina called out, her voice shaky but firm. She tried the door, and to her relief, it wasn't locked. She opened it, and the heavy smell of wet leather and blood hit her nose. The man groaned faintly but didn't move. Alina quickly unwrapped her scarf and pressed it against the wound on his head. The blood was warm, and she could feel his shallow breathing against her fingers. She glanced back toward her own car. Her daughters were sitting up now, peering out of the window with wide, worried eyes. "It's okay. Stay inside," she shouted to them, trying to sound calm. The man's lips moved slightly, as if he was trying to speak, but the sound was too faint to understand. She knew she didn't have much time. Fumbling in her pocket, she pulled out her phone and dialed emergency services, explaining the situation as quickly as she could. The rain kept falling hard, and she could feel her hair sticking to her face. When she ended the call, she tried to keep the man awake, gently shaking his shoulder. "Help is coming. Just stay with me," she said. He blinked weakly, his eyes unfocused. Minutes felt like hours until she heard the distant wail of a siren, the sound growing louder as flashing lights appeared in the distance. Relief washed over her. Soon an ambulance pulled up beside them, and 2 paramedics jumped out, moving quickly toward the man. "Ma'am, please step back," one of them said. But Alina stayed close enough to watch. She saw them lift him carefully out of the car and onto a stretcher. The rain was pouring harder now, making the scene blur at the edges. One of the paramedics asked if she was a relative. She shook her head, explaining she had just been passing by. They nodded and loaded him into the ambulance. She hesitated for a moment, glancing back at her car and her daughters. She didn't want to leave them, but something inside her told her she needed to see this through. She opened the back door of her car and told her girls they were going to follow the ambulance. Her younger daughter asked in a sleepy voice, "Mama, is he going to be okay?" Alina gave her the only answer she could. "I hope so." She followed the ambulance through the rain, her old car struggling to keep up with its speed. The city lights began to appear ahead, and she wondered who this man was, why he was alone on such a night, and why no one was there to help him until she came along. She had no idea that saving this stranger would change her life in ways she could never imagine. The ambulance moved fast through the wet streets, its flashing red and blue lights reflecting on the puddles. Alina followed close behind. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, her daughter sat quietly in the back seat, still sleepy but curious. The rain was softer now, but the air was still cold. She could hear the faint sound of the siren ahead, guiding her through the empty road. When they reached the hospital, the ambulance turned sharply into the emergency entrance. Alina parked her old car to the side and quickly got out. Her daughters followed, holding onto her coat so they wouldn't get lost. The paramedics rushed the man inside on a stretcher, his face pale, his head still wrapped in the scarf she had given him. A nurse held the hospital door open, shouting instructions to other staff. Alina stood in the hallway, water dripping from her coat, watching as they wheeled him away. She didn't know what to do. A part of her felt she should just go home, but another part wouldn't let her leave. She couldn't stop thinking about how helpless he had looked, how cold his skin had felt under her hands, and how there had been no one else around to help him. She led her daughters to the waiting area, a small corner with worn chairs and a coffee machine that smelled bitter even from far away. They sat there, the sound of beeping machines, and hurried. Footsteps echoing down the hall. Every now and then, a doctor or nurse passed by, but no one came to talk to her. She began to wonder if they even knew she had been the one to call for help. A nurse finally walked over after what felt like hours. She asked Alina a few questions: where she had found him, if she knew his name, if she was a family member. Alina shook her head each time, explaining she was just a passerby. The nurse scribbled notes and thanked her before leaving. Her daughters began to get restless, the younger one leaning against her shoulder. "Mama, I'm hungry," she whispered. Alina searched her bag and found 2 small biscuits, breaking them in half so both girls could eat. She kept looking toward the hallway where the man had been taken, her heart strangely uneasy. After a long time, another nurse approached, this one older and kinder. She smiled gently and said, "He's stable now." The doctors managed to stop the bleeding. Alina felt a wave of relief. "Is there anyone coming for him?" she asked. The nurse shook her head. "We called the number on his ID, but no one picked up." The nurse handed Alina a small plastic bag with the man's belongings, a leather wallet, a broken phone with a cracked screen, and a single business card. The name on it read Victor Hale in bold letters. She didn't recognize the name, but something about it sounded important. The kind of name that belonged to someone who had a lot in life. Alina glanced at her daughters, then back at the nurse. "Should I stay?" she asked. The nurse shrugged. "That's up to you. But right now, you're the only person here for him," so she stayed. Moving to a quieter corner of the waiting room, her daughters lay down on the seats and eventually drifted off to sleep. Again, the hours passed slowly, the smell of disinfectant filling the air. Every time a door opened, Alina looked up, hoping to see the doctor come with news. She began to wonder about this man. Why he had been out there alone in the middle of the night? Why no one had rushed to his side yet? And why his phone was broken? The thought crossed her mind that maybe he was in trouble. Maybe there was a reason no one had answered the hospital's calls. But she quickly pushed those thoughts away. All she knew for sure was that he had been hurt, and she couldn't leave until she knew he was safe. Finally, just before dawn, a young doctor came over. "He's still weak, but he's out of danger," he said. "You can see him for a few minutes." "If you'd like," Alina hesitated, looking down at her daughters who were still sleeping. She decided to go alone. She walked down the narrow hallway to a private room. The lights inside were dim, and the steady beep of a heart monitor filled the quiet space. Victor lay on the bed, his head bandaged, his skin pale, but his breathing steady. He looked peaceful, almost too peaceful compared to how she had found him. Alina stepped closer, not sure if he could hear her. "You don't know me, but I'm glad you're alive," she whispered. Her voice soft but filled with emotion. She adjusted the blanket over him before stepping back. For some reason, she felt a strange pull to stay by his side, even though he was a stranger. When she returned to the waiting area, the sun was starting to rise outside, painting the wet streets in a pale golden light. She sat down beside her daughters, thinking she would wait a little longer. She didn't realize it yet, but her decision to stay that morning would lead to something far bigger than she could imagine. The hospital corridors were quiet except for the distant sound of footsteps and the soft beeping of machines. Alina sat in the waiting area with her daughters, the early morning light spilling through the glass doors. It was warmer now inside, but the dampness from her wet clothes still clung to her skin. She brushed her younger daughter's hair back and gave her a tired smile. She had been sitting there for hours, not sure what she was waiting for. Maybe it was because no one else had come for the man. Maybe it was because she couldn't bring herself to just leave him alone. A part of her felt responsible now. After all, she had been the one to find him bleeding on the road. She kept thinking about his face, the faint movements of his lips, as if he had wanted to say something but couldn't. A nurse approached with a clipboard, her shoes squeaking slightly on the clean floor. She handed Alina a small paper cup of water and asked her a few more questions. "When you found him, was there anyone else nearby?" Alina shook her head. "No, it was just him and his car," she said. The nurse nodded, making notes before leaving again. It felt strange to be holding a bag with the man's belongings. She set it on her lap and slowly opened it. Inside was his leather wallet, the smooth black surface slightly scratched from use. She opened it, expecting to see a stack of bills. But there was no cash, only a few cards, a driver's license, a couple of credit cards, and a folded photo of what looked like an old house by the sea. She looked at the driver's license. It confirmed his name, Victor Hale. His picture was recent, sharp jawline, dark hair, serious eyes. There was also an address, but she didn't recognize it. The broken phone lay at the bottom of the bag, its screen shattered in a spiderweb pattern. She pressed the side button, but it didn't turn on, probably water damaged from the rain. The last item was a single business card, thick and elegant, with gold letters spelling out Victor Hale, Hale Enterprises. Alina stared at it for a long moment. The name sounded powerful, like it belonged to someone important. Someone with money, but that didn't match the picture of him bleeding alone in the rain with no one there to help. Her daughters woke up after a while. Rubbing their eyes, her older one asked softly, "Mama, are we going home?" Alina thought about it. She could take them home and pretend this was just a passing moment in their lives, but something inside told her this wasn't over. "Not yet," she replied. Hours passed. The hospital shifted into its daytime rhythm. Nurses rushing from room to room, doctors making rounds, visitors carrying flowers or food for patients, but no one came for Victor. Alina kept glancing at the entrance, half expecting to see a worried friend or relative appear. Yet the door stayed empty. In the afternoon, a nurse with kind eyes approached again. "He's awake now," she said, still weak, "but you can see him if you want." Alina's heart gave a small jump. She stood, telling her daughters to wait in the chairs and behave, then followed the nurse down the long hallway. When she entered the room, the air was quiet except for the gentle hum of the machines. Victor lay on the bed, his head still bandaged, but his eyes were open now. They met hers immediately. There was confusion in his gaze, but also a spark of awareness. She stepped closer, unsure of what to say. "I'm Alina," she began softly. "I Was the one who found you last night? His lips moved slightly before a hoarse voice came out. You stopped for me? She nodded. Yes, I couldn't just leave you there for a moment. He simply looked at her, as if trying to understand why a stranger would do such a thing. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice still weak. No one else would have stopped. She smiled faintly, brushing off his gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But she knew that wasn't true. The road had been empty, and most people might have been too afraid to stop in the middle of the night. Victor closed his eyes briefly, as if the effort of talking had tired him. When he opened them again, he glanced at the small bag in her hands. My things, he asked. She nodded, placing it on the table beside his bed. The nurse gave them to me. They said no one came for you. His expression changed slightly, but he didn't say anything about it. Instead, he asked, your children? They were with you? She was surprised, he remembered. Yes, they're outside. He looked away for a moment, as though lost in thought. Then his gaze returned to her. You stayed here all night? She nodded again. I wanted to make sure you were okay. There was a pause, the kind that felt heavy but not uncomfortable. Then he whispered, I owe you more than I can ever repay. Alina shook her head. You don't owe me anything. Just get better. She left the room quietly a few minutes later, her mind unsettled. There was something about him she couldn't place, a mixture of strength and loneliness. As though beneath his expensive suit and powerful name, there was a man who had no one, and for reasons she didn't understand, she cared about that when she returned to her daughters. The older one looked at her curiously. Is he nice? Alina hesitated, then smiled. Yes, he's nice. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Something about meeting Victor felt like the start of a story neither of them had seen coming. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the hospital room's curtains, casting pale golden light across the bed where Victor lay resting. Alina entered quietly, holding a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a small packet of biscuits in the other. She had bought them from the vending machine downstairs. It wasn't much, but she thought he might want something to eat. Victor turned his head slowly when he heard her footsteps, his eyes looking clearer than before. You came back, he said in a tired but warm voice. Alina gave a small smile. I was just downstairs with my daughters. I thought I'd check on you before we go home. She placed the coffee on the table beside him. You've already done more than enough, he said, his gaze fixed on her, as if studying her face. Most people wouldn't have even stopped their car last night. Yet you've stayed all this time? She shrugged lightly. It didn't feel right to leave you alone, and my daughters. They kept asking if you were okay. There was a brief silence before Victor asked, You said you're a widow. She nodded slowly, her eyes lowering for a moment. It's been 3 years now, she said softly. I work 2 jobs too. Keep us going. It's not easy, but we manage. Victor could see the strength in her voice, the way she spoke without self-pity. Yet he could also sense the weight she carried. What about your husband? He asked gently. She hesitated, then answered, He died in an accident. Her voice tightened slightly, making it clear that the memory was still painful. She didn't give details, and Victor didn't push. Instead, he changed the subject. Your daughters must be strong, like their mother, he said with a faint smile. Alina smiled back, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. They're all I have, and I'll do anything for them, she said. Victor leaned back against his pillows, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. There was something about her honesty, her quiet strength that drew him in. After a few moments, he looked toward the bag with his belongings and asked, Did you look through them? She hesitated, only to see if there was anything that might help the hospital contact someone for you. She admitted, but there wasn't much, except your business card. Victor gave a small nod. I suppose that means you know I'm not just an ordinary man. She tilted her head slightly. You mean you're a millionaire? She asked, half joking, his lips curved in a faint smile. Something like that, he said. But money doesn't mean much when you wake up and there's no one there for you. His words caught her off guard. She hadn't expected someone with his status to sound so lonely. Maybe you haven't been looking in the right places, she replied softly. He chuckled, but there was no joy in the sound. Or maybe I've been looking in the wrong people. A nurse came in briefly to check Victor's vitals, adjusting the 4-drip and noting down a few numbers before leaving again. The room felt quieter once she was gone. Victor glanced toward the door. I want to thank you properly, he said. When I'm discharged, let me do something for you and your daughters. Alina shook her head. You don't have to, but he leaned forward slightly. I want to. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign that this was just politeness. But instead, she saw sincerity and maybe even a trace of something else, a kind of unspoken promise. We'll see, she said finally. Not ready to agree, but not rejecting it either. For a moment, they just sat there in quiet understanding, she sipping her coffee, he watching her as though trying to figure out why she felt different from the rest of the people he had known. He noticed her hands slightly rough from hard work and the faint tiredness in her eyes that she tried to hide with a smile. Before she left, Victor asked if she could bring her daughters in to meet him. She hesitated but agreed, stepping outside to call them in. The girls entered shyly, standing close to their mother. Victor gave them a gentle smile. Your mother is very brave, he told them. She saved me. The younger one giggled softly while the older one nodded seriously. Alina could see the way Victor's expression softened when he looked at them, as if seeing something he hadn't felt in a long time, warmth, trust, maybe even a glimpse of family. When they left the room, Victor watched them go, his mind turning over thoughts he couldn't quite put into words. That night, as Alina lay in bed at home, she kept thinking about him, about the way he had spoken, the loneliness in his voice, and the strange feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. She didn't know what the coming days would bring, but she had a feeling that this was only the beginning of something that could change everything. A few days passed, and Victor was finally ready to leave the hospital. The rain from that night seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by clear skies and bright mornings. Alina didn't expect to see him again after he was discharged. She thought he would return to his world, the world of expensive cars, fine suits, and important meetings. But that morning, as she was folding laundry in her small apartment, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to find Victor standing there, dressed in a simple shirt and jeans instead of his usual formal clothes. He was holding a bouquet of fresh white lilies and a small paper bag. Her daughters peeked out from behind her, curious. I hope I'm not intruding, he said with a gentle smile. I just wanted to thank you properly. Alina stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small, the furniture worn, but it was neat and clean. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains. Her daughters sat on the couch, still staring at Victor with wide eyes. He handed Alina the flowers and placed the paper bag on the table. It's just some pastries from a bakery I like, he explained, and for the girls, there's chocolate inside. They all sat together, and for the first time, Victor saw the way Alina's home reflected her life, simple but full of quiet warmth. There were drawings made by her daughters, stuck to the walls, a sewing kit on the table, and a shelf of old books. It felt nothing like the cold, empty spaces he had been used to. After a few minutes of small talk, Victor leaned forward, his tone becoming more serious. Alina, you didn't just save my life that night. You stayed. You made sure I wasn't alone. That means more than I can say. She gave a small smile. I only did what anyone with a heart would do. But Victor shook his head. No, not everyone would have done that. He paused before continuing. I want to help you and your daughters. Whatever you need, school fees, clothes, anything. Just tell me. Alina immediately shook her head. No, I can't take money from you. You don't owe me anything. Her voice was polite but firm. Victor studied her face. This isn't about owing, he said quietly. It's about wanting to do something good for the person who helped me when I had no one. Alina hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse again, but she thought about the rent she was behind on, the worn-out shoes her daughters wore to school, and the nights she stayed awake wondering how to make ends meet. I don't want charity, she said softly. I've learned to live without help. Victor's expression softened. Then think of it as friendship, not charity, he replied. Friends help each other. Her daughters, unaware of the deeper conversation, were busy unwrapping the chocolates, giggling quietly. Victor watched them for a moment, something in his eyes shifting. If you'll allow me, I'd also like to visit sometimes. Maybe take them to the park or help with their studies, he added. Alina was surprised. Why? She asked honestly. He smiled faintly. Because I don't have anyone in my life who looks at me the way they just did. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded. We'll see, she said, not promising, but not shutting the door either. Before leaving, Victor stood at the doorway for a long moment, as if reluctant to go. You know, Alina, he said, the night you found me, I wasn't just hurt physically, I was lost, in more ways than one. He gave her a small nod. You might have saved more than just my life. And with that, he left. That night, Alina sat by the window after putting her daughters to bed. The lilies Victor had brought were in a jar on the table, their sweet scent filling the room. She thought about his words, about the look in his eyes when he spoke of being alone, and about the way her daughters had laughed with him as if they had known him forever. Something inside her told her that letting him into their lives could change everything, for better or for worse. She didn't know yet, but she couldn't deny that the thought of seeing him again didn't scare her the way it should have. Instead, it made her heart feel lighter than it had in years. Days turned into weeks, and Victor began visiting Alina and her daughters more often. Sometimes he would stop by with small gifts, a bag of fresh fruit, a box of school supplies, or warm bread from a bakery. Other times, he would simply sit with them, sharing tea and listening to the girls talk about their school. Alina noticed how her daughters had grown fond of him. They would rush to the door whenever they heard his knock, eager to see what story or surprise he might bring. One evening, Victor arrived a little later than usual. The sun had already set, and the small apartment was lit by the warm glow of a single lamp. Alina invited him in, and they sat at the table while the girls played in the corner. He looked at her thoughtfully before speaking. Alina, you've told me a little about your life, but I feel like there's more, something you keep inside. She hesitated, her hands resting on the mug of tea in front of her. There's nothing much to tell, she replied quietly. But Victor didn't believe her. You carry yourself like someone who has been through storms, he said. I can see it in your eyes. After a long pause, Alina finally began to speak, her voice low. 3 years ago, my husband died in what they called an accident. But I've never believed it, she said. He was a mechanic. He worked long hours, but he was honest. One night, he didn't come home. They told me he was found dead near the workshop. They said it was an accident with one of the machines. But I knew he had enemies. Her fingers tightened around the mug. Victor listened in silence, his expression serious. Enemies? He asked. What kind of enemies would a mechanic have? Alina sighed. He wasn't just a mechanic. Sometimes, to make extra money, he fixed cars for people who didn't want questions asked, people who lived outside the law. He didn't want me involved, but I knew. She looked down at the table, her voice trembling slightly. After his death, I started getting strange calls, people asking for money, threatening me, saying my husband owed them. I had nothing to give them. So I moved here with my daughters, far away from the city. Hoping they wouldn't find me, Victor leaned back, processing her words. And have they? He asked. Alina nodded slowly. Once a man came to the house, said he was a friend of my husband's. I knew he wasn't. He asked questions about whether I had anything of my husband's documents. Money, even tools. I told him no. And he left, but I could tell he didn't believe me. There was a moment of silence before Victor spoke again. You've been carrying all this alone, he said softly. Alina gave a small, tired smile. I've had no choice. I can't trust anyone, she said. The only thing I care about now is keeping my daughters safe. Victor's gaze softened. You're stronger than you realize, he told her. Most people would have broken under that kind of pressure, but you didn't. Alina shook her head. I'm not strong, I'm just surviving. As the girls came over to show them a drawing they had made, Victor looked at them and then back at Alina. Something shifting inside him. You don't have to do it alone anymore, he said quietly. She looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, let me help you, really help you, he said. Not just with money or gifts, but with protection. With making sure no one can ever threaten you or your daughters again. Alina's eyes searched his face, trying to decide if he was serious. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor didn't look away. Because you were there for me when I had no one. Because you didn't ask for anything in return. And because... He paused, then continued. Because I don't want to watch you fight this battle alone for a long moment. She didn't say anything. The sound of her daughter's laughter filling the space between them. Finally, she nodded slowly. I'll think about it, she said. That night, after Victor left, Alina sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. She thought about the past she had tried so hard to leave behind, the dangers that might still be lurking, and the strange comfort she felt knowing that Victor wanted to stand beside her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone, and that scared her, but it also gave her a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a cold evening when trouble came back into Alina's life. The day had been quiet, the girls had gone to school, and Victor had stopped by in the afternoon to bring some groceries. They had tea together before he left, promising to come. By the next day, by nightfall, the streets outside were empty. Only the dim glow of the streetlights breaking the darkness. Alina was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when she heard a knock at the door. It wasn't the gentle kind of knock Victor used. This one was loud and impatient. Her heart tightened. She dried her hands quickly and walked to the door. Her daughters peeked from the living room, sensing something was off. Who is it? She called out. There was no answer at first. Then a man's voice replied. An old friend of your husband's. The tone was cold. To calm, she froze, memories of the past rushing back. She didn't open the door. I don't know you, she said firmly. The man chuckled. You don't have to know me. I'm here for what your husband owed. Her daughters moved closer to her, their eyes wide. She motioned for them to go to their room and stay there. But before she could speak again, the man at the door knocked harder. I know you have something that belonged to him, he said. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Fear gripped her, but she tried to keep her voice steady. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. The man laughed again. Go ahead, they won't get here in time. His words sent a chill through her. Then she heard footsteps behind her, not from the hallway, but from outside, strong, quick steps approaching the door. Before she could react, a familiar voice spoke from just outside. She told you to leave. It was Victor, his tone low but dangerous. There was a pause. Then the man's voice turned sharp. And who are you? Victor didn't answer right away. Instead, He stepped into view when Alina opened the door slightly, his tall figure blocking the stranger from getting closer. "The one who's going to make sure you regret knocking on this door," he said, his voice calm but firm. The man's smirk faded a little, but he still tried to sound confident. "This is none of your business." Victor took a slow step forward. "It became my business the moment you threatened her and her children." The man glanced at him, then at the door, as if weighing his chances. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and backed away. Disappearing into the dark street, Alina let out a shaky breath. Victor turned to her. "Are you all right?" She nodded slowly, though her hands were trembling. "I knew this day might come," she whispered. "I just didn't think it would be so soon." Victor's jaw tightened. "It won't happen again," he said. "Not while I'm here." They went inside, and Alina called her daughters out of the bedroom, reassuring them that everything was fine, though she could still see the fear in their eyes. Victor stayed for the rest of the evening, keeping an eye on the window and the door. As they sat at the table later, Alina looked at him. "You didn't have to get involved," she said softly. Victor met her gaze. "Yes, I did," he replied. "I meant what I said before. You don't have to fight alone anymore." There was a deep sincerity in his voice, the kind that made her chest tighten. She realized then that he wasn't just offering help out of gratitude anymore. There was something more, a sense of protectiveness, a willingness to stand between her and any danger. That night, after he left, she locked the door and checked the windows twice, but she felt a strange calm, knowing he was nearby. For the first time in years, she believed someone would actually come if she called for help. The next morning, Alina woke to the sound of her daughters laughing. It was rare to hear such carefree laughter in their home. She stepped into the small kitchen to find Victor already there, making breakfast, the smell of fresh eggs and warm bread filled the air. He looked up at her with a smile. "I thought you could use a break," he said. She smiled faintly, still a little surprised at how easily he fit into their lives. They sat together at the table, the girls chatting happily. Between bites, Victor listened to every word, as if their stories were the most important thing in the world. Alina noticed how relaxed they seemed around him, as though they had known him for years. After breakfast, Victor asked the girls to go play in their room, leaving him and Alina alone. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice calm but serious. "Last night proved something. You're not safe here. That man will be back, or someone else like him. And I won't always arrive in time." Alina frowned. "I can't just leave. This is our home." Victor shook his head gently. "A home is not just walls, Alina. It's a place where you're safe, where you can sleep without fear." She looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. Victor leaned forward. "Come live with me. I have a house outside the city. It's big enough for you and the girls. There's a garden, space for them to play, and no one who would dare threaten you there." Alina stared at him in shock. "Victor, I can't just move into your house," she said. "People will talk, and I don't want my daughters to think." But he interrupted gently. "This isn't about what people will say. It's about keeping you safe. You've done so much on your own. Let someone else carry the weight for a while." His words stayed with her all day, even after he left. She thought about the fear in her daughter's eyes the night before, the constant worry every time a stranger walked down the street, and the truth hit her. They had never really been safe. That evening, Victor returned with his car and helped them pack. It didn't take long. Their life fit into a few suitcases and boxes. The girls were excited, thinking of it as an adventure. But Alina's heart was heavy as she locked the door for the last time. She didn't know if she was making the right choice, only that she had to try. When they arrived at Victor's house, Alina was stunned. It wasn't the kind of cold, empty mansion she had imagined. It was warm and welcoming, with sunlight streaming through wide windows and a garden blooming with flowers. The girls ran to explore, their laughter echoing through the hallways. Victor showed Alina a cozy room for her and separate rooms for the girls, each already prepared with fresh bedding and little touches he thought they might like. "I wanted them to feel at home right away," he said. She felt her eyes sting, but quickly blinked it away. Over the next days, life began to change. The girls thrived, running through the garden, helping Victor in the kitchen, and even teaching him a few games. Alina felt herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. She no longer jumped at every knock on the door, no longer stayed up at night, listening for footsteps outside. One afternoon, she found Victor in the garden, fixing the fence. "You didn't have to do all this for us," Sure said quietly. He wiped his hands and looked at her. "Alina, the night you saved me, I thought it was just a moment of kindness. But it was more than that. You reminded me what it means to have someone care. I don't want this to be temporary." She looked at him, unsure how to answer. But she knew one thing. He had kept every promise he made. He had protected her, given her daughters a safe place, and never once asked for anything in return. Weeks later, she received a letter from her old landlord saying a man had come by, asking about her, but he was turned away. She realized then how close danger had been, and how easily it could have found her if not for Victor. One evening, as the sun set, she stood on the porch watching her daughters play. Victor joined her. Standing quietly for a moment before speaking, "You saved my life on that road. But what you don't know is, you saved me from a life where I had everything and yet nothing." He turned to her, his voice softer now. "Let me be here for you, the way you were for me." Alina didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, and in that moment, she knew this wasn't just about safety anymore. It was about family. It's about finding something worth holding on to after both had lost so much. From that night on, the fear that had once followed her everywhere began to fade, replaced by the steady comfort of knowing she was no longer alone. The woman who had once been a black widow with 2 daughters, struggling to survive, had found something she never thought she'd have again: a true home and a man who would stand beside her for the rest of her life.